and Beth Reimer, the DINSTAT from the National Writing Project. Some of you may have gotten an invitation to this hangout, so we want to be really clear up at the beginning about what we're going to be doing here today. We certainly welcome you to stay, but this particular hangout is about professional development in the classroom. It's a conversation that Linda and Beth are going to facilitate in the spirit of the work that those of us in the I3 College Ready Writers program are doing around the country in districts and classrooms and with teachers. So you're welcome to stay if you got an invitation from Tom Fox to join this hangout. We'd love to have you. If you are staying, you'll want to sign up for a chat roll account and participate in the on-air chat. The format for this hangout is that Beth and Linda will be on air and I will help facilitate the conversation. Tom Fox is our chat room person who's in the chat role and will be feeding questions that you have or comments that you have or things that you would like us to elaborate on to us from your chat role. Linda Friedrich is here from the National Writing Project, and she will also be helping out in the chat role, as are some other people from the National Writing Project. So if you're here, please do sign up to chat, and the conversation here will be a discussion led by Beth and Linda, who are both, those of you in the I3 College Ready Writers program would know that they are thinking partners for this program. But the reason that they're here today especially is that they have deep experience in doing in-class professional development long-term in schools, in high-need schools. And so what we asked them to do was bring that experience and expertise so that they can talk it through, compare it. We can get new thinking out there. You can give us your thinking, which they can then feed into the conversation, your questions about this work that we're doing as part of the I3, and see where we get to. We also have some great resources that we'll be sharing in the, we have a Google folder that we'll send you a link to, and also on the website that we have here, we'll post all the resources. So let me tell you what we thought we'd do. When we were planning for this, what emerged that would be helpful were some principles that Beth and Linda got to as they were telling their stories of the work that they do. So the way we want to structure this is to have Linda and then Beth share some guiding principles that they've come to. And we were just laughing and saying these are guiding principles that are important, and they could also change on another day because we really tried to narrow this for the conversation. And then they're going to talk and tell their stories of how they've done this work in the classrooms. We'll refer to some of the documents that we have, and then hope to hear from you in the chat room. So, hi Linda, hi Beth.
Hi.
Hi.
Say where you are today, both of you.
I am in Michigan, and I just received about 7 inches of snow in the last couple of days. So my driveway is sometimes almost invisible with the snow blowing across it.
Do you have snow, Beth?
We had snow. So we had the elusive snow days recently, which were lovely. But right now we are clean roads, and I am in Oxford at Miami University in Ohio.
Great. So the purpose of this conversation, before I turn this over to Linda to talk, is really to expand our thinking about possibilities. And I will try to come back to that throughout. We're doing hard work together, and there isn't one right way to do it, and it's going to be changing throughout the course of the 2 years. And I think we especially want to think hard about the kinds of professional development that work in middle and high schools with the teachers that we're working with there especially. So some of this is new territory for people as well. So wherever you are on the spectrum of doing this work, to think more broadly and to think about the possibilities and why we do some things one way at one time and why at another. So, so that leads us to this notion of some principles that guide the work. So, Linda, why don't you start? And Tom actually can put on the screen some a little, just a bulleted list, but to keep track of this as we go along, and we'll also make this available to you. So, in a minute, he'll screen share that. But Linda, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So I think I picked 4 basic principles. One is like essential for me. I really think everything is co-constructed. The work that you're doing is developed with the people that you're working with, or the people I've been working with, and it's all about collaborative conversations, collaborative work, and my role is always changing in that collaborative work. But I always see myself as a co-learner. So that's number 1. Number 2 is it's just like Joy just said, the possibilities. You're looking for opportunities because it seems always in these places that I've been working in, I've been working in a SIG school, the ground is shifting. And so I'm looking for little mini studies that I can engage not only the teachers but their students in studying together. And so it has to be concrete work where classroom interaction and students are involved.
Linda, would you back up and say what a SIG school is?
Oh, sure. Let me explain. I'm in Oak Park High School in Oak Park, Michigan. It's just on the border of Detroit. It is a SIG school. For the last 3 years, it has received a grant from the federal government because it is a school improvement school. So SIG is a school improvement grant. And it was in the bottom 5% of the state of Michigan in its achievement. And it is no longer in danger of being closed, but when I started there, the likelihood that it would be closed and the students would be distributed to other districts was very high potential. So I want to move on to principle number 3, which is classrooms, getting in and interacting with kids. I think that it's so important. Talking with teachers is one thing, but talking with teachers when you're in a classroom with them, when their students are in the classroom with you, it just makes all the difference. And the last thing is be honest. And I think that probably the best thing I ever did was the first day I met these folks. Someone said, "So have you ever done this before? Have you returned to high school around before?" A SIG high school at the bottom 5%, and I had to say, no, I haven't. And we will learn how to do this together. And it was the best thing I could have said.
So we want Beth to then, in a parallel way, talk about the principles that underlie our work, and then Beth and Linda will talk a little bit about just the big ideas that we have here. So Beth, over to you.
So just to ground my principles a moment, my experience is a little bit different. So I am not working in an embedded kind of situation where I get to work with the teachers in a continual kind of situation. So my work looks a lot different, and my principles came about through my journey, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So my first principle has to do with something I think that was true about classroom teaching, which is meet teachers where they are in that moment with your classroom work. Too many times I thought I had this plan and structure that I wanted to have happen, and so my in-class professional development thought I would just kind of march along with my plan and structure, and when I did that, it didn't work. And so I had to meet them where they were, in that I had to ask them, what's the rationale for this, in-class structure? What's the purpose of this class demonstration? Do they need to see students writing? Do they need to see student potential? Do they need to see how how writing isn't magic? So it's meeting teachers exactly where they are in that class demo, even if it's not where I thought I was going to be, which might mean we change a little bit, or it's not the perfect lesson from the start. So the second principle so the first principle had a lot to do with asking why. Why are we having this classroom work anyway, or work with teachers? The second principle is go ahead and structure the conversation around the work. So provide a structure. My structure is super easy, a little graphic organizer that just records observations, and then structure the deconstruction of the lesson. Because without that kind of structured conversation, lots of the work gets lost. And the third principle is probably the one that the journey showed me the most that I've had, which is provide multiple points of entry into classroom work. So a demo lesson's great, but it's not the only way, because some teachers then need one-on-one time to help plan through and think through a unit. And then other teachers need small group time together. And then other teachers need you just to hang around for a day and pop in and conference and just be part of the day. And so there had to be multiple points of entry and possibilities for classroom work. And I guess the final one had to do with not the classroom work, but the TC work, where providing some kind of reflection about the classroom professional development so we could see where we went next.
So I was wondering so the principles are here in front of us, and I wondered if we need to take a step back and say just some words about what professional development in the classroom can be called, because throughout your principles you've named some structures. So Beth, I just heard you say, for instance, model lesson.
Yeah.
So let's just name like the array of things that you all would call under the heading of professional development in the classroom.
You want to go first, Beth?
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
Oh, okay. I asked if you wanted to go first. So I think modeling lessons is the obvious one. If you're going to step into a classroom and teachers want to grow their practice, it's an easy first step to show them another way to imagine teaching and working with students in classrooms. So. But if you move beyond that, I think observing teachers is another easy step. But just observing them is really that's where it gets sticky, because afterwards you have to talk to them about and knowing how, and Beth was talking about having a protocol for observing and then responding, and I know she'll talk more about that. But those are the two entrants for me, because I'm doing embedded work. And embedded means to me that I'm actually in classrooms with teachers 2 to 3 days a week. I'm actually in 1 hour of every teacher who's on my consulting load, at least one day, the same hour, every time I visit. I mean, one class hour, the same class hour every time I visit. And so the next two things are really key for me, is actually observing and interacting with the students, and then talking with the teacher on the side during the lesson. And so that observation interaction is really key, and it's something that I learned and developed when I was working with my Oak Park teachers. And then the last one would be to co-teach. So those would be the 4 ways that I found working in classrooms are most effective. Beth?
So Beth, what would you add just under this titling?
So what would I add? So I had kind of similar things in terms of model lessons or demo lessons, co-teaching, co-planning conferences, which I think is something that Linda said, and I think we just called it something different in terms of talking through the thinking of teaching with teachers, and that might be one-on-one, or it might be in small groups to get kind of to help teachers get in your head of how might a lesson look. And then we have two other things that we call just professional conversations that are kind of little snippets of things that maybe don't count as classroom PD, but they're on site with teachers, and they're just short, right? This idea of creating this professional conversation that might not happen, and so instead of classroom, you're in their space and in their lunchroom or in their workroom or in their planning time. And then we have something that we call drop-in days, where we are just kind of there for the day, open access, and we will end up making a schedule that says for this half hour, we're in this classroom being an extra conferencing pair. In this half hour, we're doing a lesson on introductions because that's where they are and they want to see what that looks like. In this half hour, we're talking with a teacher about a question she has about writing instruction. And we just call them drop-in days where we're there on site, and sometimes we're in the classroom and sometimes we're just with teachers. So it's a little bit different.
So just to say that this is one of the things that we want to open up, are all of these approaches and this thinking about how you do what and when. Thank you all in the chat room. We wish we could all see each other, but this is great. So I'm going to say, before we move on, so there's a question from the chat room that, Linda, I think you should probably take first, which is this idea about, someone has named it the stickiness of observing, how it's both, you know, uncomfortable for people and an entry point. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it is sticky, actually. And one of my principles is to ask permission. So I never go into a classroom if a teacher doesn't say, yes, please come into my room, please, you know, I'm willing for you to observe and talk about my teaching. And because if you step into someone's classroom, and you can stop in, and I've found, and I'll say I have found that if I can stop in, teachers will let me stop in for 15 minutes, but at first they don't want me to stay the whole hour, and they certainly don't want me to take notes. And they don't really want me to talk about it afterwards either. So, and they're fine if I'm looking at the students, or if I'm you know, because sometimes there's moments in the lesson where the students are working. They're happy for me to actually talk to the students and tell them later what I noticed about their students. They're not so happy at first to really deconstruct their teaching and talk about what they might do for next steps, right? And so it's sort of a continuum. There are people who will at first say, sure, come right in. There are other teachers that are going to want to be the last person to ever have an observation. And so, yeah, it is sticky. And I'll say another sticky spot, which is really important, is letting other teachers into your classroom so that 2 or 3 teachers can be observing one teacher and then unpack that classroom instruction. So there's layers of stickiness, right?
Linda, as you're talking, that stickiness, I'm thinking too about just even the climate and culture that our teachers are working in today's world. That This idea of somebody coming in and observing them and looking for something isn't always productive and collaborative and collegial, right? Or at least they don't feel like it is. So that idea of, before that kind of step happens, that need for community seems really important.
Oh,
because you have to have this level of trust that is definitely about working together to improve everything and not about finding something that's wrong or evaluating, because the teachers are living in a tricky climate.
Yes, in the SIG school I was in Oak Park, the teachers were worried they were going to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
So they were scared. They were very scared. And fortunately, I had one teacher who I'd been working with in the middle school that had been moved up, and I had a relationship with her, and it helped a lot to build a relationship with other people in the building. 'Cause building that relationship of trust is key. And so there's small things you do, right? The little side conversations, the little PD moments, like you're saying, you come and you drop in and you're available. I mean, being available is huge, so that they know that they can trust you and ask questions.
And so you're not just, because you're trying to build this community, right? And so you're
Right.
not just this person that comes in as this expert, that of course everything looks lovely. Of course it's perfect. Of course you practice this model lesson, but that you're there and having this conversation. So I think that's really important, and that everybody can talk together then about what's going on in the classroom.
Exactly.
And so to get this thinking into, I think somebody said it really well in the chat room, that it's about making sure that teachers have agency in all parts of the process.
Right.
Don't you love that?
And I think that goes back to that collaborative, co-constructed conversation approach, because if you're coming and telling them what to do, and instead you're inquiring about ways that, or creating a menu or a repertoire of ways, so there's not one right way. One right way is like death. I mean, because for me, again, I'll say, I mean, these teachers were very worried, and they wanted to figure out what they were doing, but they also wanted to see that something that they were doing was good, because they're in the bottom 5, right? They want to think that they're good teachers on some level.
Yeah, it's also striking me that the stance that we bring from the culture of a writing project is this notion that everyone's voices, all the students, all the teachers, all the TCs, all the community's voices are equally important and valued, and where they start and what they want to know and do has to be part of the process. So as I'm listening to you all talk, it feels like we're taking the culture of writing project work with us in the schools alongside of us, as it is us, but it's also what we bring to this conversation, and the modeling and model lessons for me is about that culture as much as it is the content of whatever the lesson is.
And I think that building a community is huge. So I want to step, if possible, into the story, a little bit of the story of the work. The first day I met the teachers at Oak Park, I brought a single reading, and really it was a chapter out of Peter Johnston's book on agency, and building agency in students. But it was also tied to the fact that I brought them all a notebook. A writer's notebook, research notebook, reader's notebook. We were going to actually have all the students have notebooks as well. And so from the very beginning, I wanted to position the teachers as students of themselves and students of their students from the first day I met them, because they obviously know things about teaching and learning. That some of them had been teaching for 8 years, 10 years. And so I wanted to put them in that position as a co-learner with me, as a co-researcher with me of themselves and their students. And it made all the difference in the world to start that way, rather than to, and I think that's a writing project stance. I mean, to actually be an inquirer. And so you probably, what would you add on to that, Beth?
So
from your own experience, I mean. You know.
Yeah. So I'll be honest with everybody that's in this chat room right now that something that I told Linda the other day is that when I grow up one day, I want to be Linda, right? Because I'm on the opposite end. My journey is really different. Maybe not really different, right? It's just I'm at a different place in my journey, in that my story was kind of trial by fire kind of story with this, and we were building our PD program at our site from ground up, and so we started where we knew, working with teachers, and then we had whole group days that were great and all that kind of stuff, and then we realized that the transfer to the classroom wasn't happening, and the teachers loved us, but the transfer to the classroom wasn't happening because the teachers had lots of questions like, well, this won't really work with my students. Well, what would it has it really look in 40 minutes? How could you really come in and really, this is my real question. So we started realizing we needed to get in there together. And so I started kind of with model lessons and just what does that look like? And then from there, I started saying, wait, that worked for some teachers, and I thought it was a really good idea, right? Because teachers I could say to them, like, well, where I didn't have this big cachet of really great model lessons, I'm going to admit, and so I didn't have tons to draw on, and so I ended up doing something I guess was smart, but it was mostly because I didn't have a great chapter from Peter Johnson to lay back on, and that was I just said, so what's the lesson that you wish you could teach right now to your students, but you don't know how? And that's where we started. And I would just really ask the teachers, where are we, and how did that relate to what we were learning? And then from there, we just kept adding on different possibilities to create conversations. So the story does, the story's a little bit different, I guess, but similar in principles and understandings.
So I want to say, when I wish I had been like you when I started.
Yeah.
Because I learned by making lots of mistakes, and people paid me to make those mistakes, which was nice, I guess. I noticed that people are asking me to unpack co-teaching, and so the thing I want to say about co-teaching is, like, that is the last thing that I would ever had teachers do with me. It took me a year and a little over a year before the teachers would actually let me in their classrooms and co-teach with them. So, because co-teaching really requires, and the commitment that we made when they agreed to let me co-teach with them was that they would adjust their lesson in the moment, and that we would be working together to study the kids in the moment and adjust their instruction. And they were really afraid to do that. So that was the reason that we went to and created what we designed as a co-teaching model. Because what they realized is that if they waited until the next day or the end of the week to find out if the kids were learning, that they lost a half a class or 2 or 3 days. And it was so urgent to make change, because the first year we only had 1% growth, and they were scared because they were, and so we had to get about 12 or 10 or 12% growth. And so they said, okay, we'll step up to co-teaching. So what does co-teaching look like? The teacher actually does a lesson. It's a lesson built in a unit that has a series of lessons that have an instructional goal, an end in mind. the teachers and I have unpacked that unit together prior to the instruction of the unit, and we've selected texts that we're scaffolding across